Well, for more on the challenges facing Honduras, I'm joined by Remi Piet. He's a senior partner at Embellie Advisory. Thank you for joining us again.
Good evening, Rachelle.
So obviously for a lot of people, COVID's still at the forefront. So how would you describe the state of Honduras's COVID containment and vaccination efforts?
Well, the state of the COVID containment effort is obviously as equal to Latin America, very, very complex, and not obviously the rolling out of vaccines or the quite, very, let's say, ambitious plans or advanced plans in terms of vaccination. But in the case of Honduras, the issue in terms of migration is not only COVID related, it's really structural to Honduras, a state that has been plagued by a series of environmental hazard, as was mentioned just before, but also a security situation which is one of the worst in terms also of embezzlement, of nepotism from the state itself. The Hernandez family at the head of the country has been ruled actually as drug trafficking in U.S. courts recently. So in that situation, we see a country which is extremely unstable politically and in the hand of a criminalized organization that therefore obviously force the population or are a large part of the population is trying to migrate north, and this leads obviously to this migration and caravans that we've seen in Latin America up to the American border.
So then, as we take a broader look at Honduras's economic makeup, what have been traditionally the drivers for the economy, and what have been its biggest challenges?
So the problem for a lot of Latin American economies or at least Central American economies in the case of Honduras is that they were countries that were very much on agro production, some limited added value production in that region. They were countries that were also very much impacted by the Cold War and their development and siding on one country on one side of the Cold War equation. But they have not unfortunately been able to diversify the economy and have been plagued by a series of leaders that were not, let's say, the ideal democratic system or representative. And unfortunately, in the case of Honduras, we see it also in Nicaragua. There is also going to face elections in November this year. There is going to be instability. There is going to be civil conflict. Unfortunately, the last elections in Honduras in 2017 was plagued by some wrongdoings, and that led to the victory of Hernandez. And it's likely that we're going to see additional conflict in the next few months in both Honduras and Nicaragua, and then obviously other elements of economic turns that encourage population to move and try to pass to the U.S.
And obviously we have to look at how this affects people's everyday life. We see that the World Bank finds that Honduras has the worst levels of economic inequality in all of Latin America. Nearly 2/3 of Hondurans, that's about 5.5 million people, live in poverty. How much has the pandemic and some of these other factors really exacerbated people's economic well-being as well as the businesses there?
I mean, you mentioned the key statistics here is the level of inequality in the country. I mean, and compared to its neighbors, which are already extremely unequal in their distribution of wage and riches. But in the question, obviously, of COVID's impact on those economies, the poorest part of the population are the ones most severely impacted. We've seen in other countries in Latin America, in Peru, in Argentina, some more wealthy part of the population that were able to get access to the vaccines ahead of time. And that's the case, I mean, obviously, in terms also of the propagation of the disease to the population that unfortunately don't have the capacity to confine themselves and have to work every day. So the impact is obviously, I would believe, undervalued in Honduras. And as I said, these concerns of potential additional conflicts and political instability along the next few months are concerning. What's important to mention, however, maybe to point to this is obviously the change in terms of the U.S. policy towards the region. There's a much more ambitious plan since the arrival of the Biden administration, which is not limited to migrations and security, but actually really to foreign aid to those countries. And there's a debate of how effective the foreign aid can be, but definitely that will be a more ambitious plan to try to keep those population in the countries, encourage them towards the diversification of the economy and creation of value for the countries. But in the case of Honduras and Nicaragua, which is not a part of the program now, but there's the issue of political stability that might be improved at the end of this year. So we should monitor very closely the election coming in November.
And as you mentioned, Honduras is one of the 3 countries that the Biden administration says it wants to invest in so that there are better economic and political conditions at home that would make people feel secure enough not to migrate, as well as other issues, as you mentioned, security. What would be needed to make this approach successful, though?
So, I mean, in those countries, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, are very different, structure in terms of the economy. The extractive sector is stronger in Guatemala. Salvador has a very different political line than Honduras, and so we should not really see those countries differently. But what is the potential here, and what would make it successful is obviously to be able to apply best practices in terms of regulations, in terms of whether it's a fiscal policies or it is a series of regulations towards foreign investments. And also, having this approach of having it, trickle down closer, faster, and especially potentially in, a series of the methodologies through USAID or through IFC or other organization of foreign aid include, better participation with communities, includes, bottom-up approach to local development with microcredits or other tools. So this is going to be the very interesting, the layup of different policies and strategies from those, development agencies from Washington, D.C. The question of whether it's going to be successful will depend on the local actors that they will work with and the capacity to really, show the potential evolution in countries that I mentioned. I always focus right now on Honduras and Nicaragua. Well, Nicaragua not being part of it, but Honduras, because of the upcoming elections and the instability of the country, may be easier to put in place in Salvador and Guatemala than in Honduras.
I know we'll all be watching those election outcomes very closely. Thank you so much. Remi Piet there, Senior Partner at Embellie Advisory.